Am I a libertarian or conservative? In this video, I discuss what I believe today, as well as the label I use to describe my political beliefs. So let me just start out with this. I'm definitely right-wing, and I'm arguably far right in the sense that I prioritize capitalism over socialism and individualism over collectivism. I'm also for as limited government as we can get away with, and I hope that eventually we can see small government again, both at the federal, state, and local levels. I believe in life, liberty, and property, and as such, I'm also pro-life, against the death penalty, except for the most extreme cases, and I believe our personal liberties and property rights should not be infringed without some form of due process. I also believe in other individual liberties like freedom of speech and religion, to the right to bear arms and self-defense, and the right of privacy, and I'm also against illegal search and seizure. I'm always leaning towards liberty. I don't hope to make conservatives out of libertarians. I hope to turn conservatives into libertarians. In fact, I view libertarians as a line between classical liberalism and modern-day conservatism. I could see myself as a conservatarian, for example, though I'm still trying to come to terms with the value of that label so I don't use it myself. I believe the U.S. Constitution is a document of limited enumerated powers that the government has no business expanding on without amendments or constitutional conventions, and living, breathing documents are fiction best left to fantasy novels. I also believe in originalism and textualism as interpretive methods of the law, not just the U.S. Constitution, and I think judicial review has been used to negative net effect since its use on the Supreme Court. I believe in an incremental approach to reaching my goals rather than a radical approach, given that radicalism often leads to violent means of achieving goals. I'm a strong believer in federalism and distributed powers of the government, as well as decentralizing federal powers. I also believe in subsidiarity, localism, and regionalism. So in many cases, I believe government should be as close to you as possible, rather than having someone hundreds or thousands of miles away making decisions for me and others. As someone within the constitutional conservative / libertarian / classical liberal political space, this makes me a minarchist today. I would be considered somewhere between a minarchist and classical liberal, and the degree to which government should provide defense and security is debatable in my opinion, but I see that the military, as it is an impossible to manage nightmare that needs reining in. One of the reasons I identify as a libertarian in many ways is because I feel like it allows me to be more critical of the rights, such as Fox News and Breitbart and other institutions there, just as I've always been critical of CNN and more recently MSNBC, for example. I'm always pushing towards individualism, free markets, limited government, federalism, etc. But by today's standards, I would also feel at home with a libertarian conservative label. Even if we were to limit our current government to explicitly the enumerated powers and no further, I would then pursue a course of even more personal liberty and less government, including a more voluntary government, less laws on the state and local level, and more free trade with other nations. I prioritize freedom over equality, but justice above both. But I do value them all, and I think there's a context to each of those concepts from an individual lens. I still believe in equality under the law, but that would be best enforced in a voluntary way, though I'm also for discrimination in certain limited extents, so long as that is voluntary. I believe that people need to be free to make their own mistakes, and I also think classes and class struggles are just as stupid as social constructs as social justice warfare. Justice is an individual principle by default, so I can't get behind social justice, which is just enforced collectivism based on attributes, many of which are immutable and can't be changed, like your race or gender. However, keep this in mind, I'm not against socialism in a voluntary sense, i.e. if people want to join groups, be it businesses or housing or communities and so forth, that's all fine with me. But these associations need to be cooperative, not coercive. I often get along with anarcho-communists and libertarian socialists, mostly because, at least with the ones I've talked with or met, they're generally against government force like I am. Well, we just differ on things like currency, classes, borders, property rights, and individual versus social responsibility. The people I look up to the most on the right are Ronald Reagan as he turned me from essentially liberalism to conservatism. He was known as a great communicator who spent all of his time appealing to everyone on the right rather than attacking them over differences here and there. And by a wide margin, everyone else, in my opinion, falls short, though people like Hayek, Sowell, and Friedman are up there. I'm also a fan of Ron Paul. I think the neoconservatives of today would not have made Reagan successful if he listened to them and them only and ignored everyone else on the right. Conservative populism is inherently different than progressive populism, and unfortunately there's no great unifier on the right today. Milton Friedman once asked, "Do you support forcing motorcyclists to wear helmets?" He asked because he believed that was one of the ways you can discern whether or not that person answering the question truly believes in individual liberty. The motorcyclist assumes the risk of his actions, not the regulator. One of the things that William F. Buckley said decades ago that still rings with me today is his description of himself. He said he wasn't the smartest person, but he had a quick wit. I feel I'm the opposite. Pretty smart, but slow to respond. And that's why I script these videos, for example, and write on social media and used to debate on internet forums, news groups, and bulletin board services. I would also say that Buckley has been a positive influence on me over the decades. I feel like in many ways these labels are moving targets, so it's easy to see one person have a view of these labels that's different from another person's view. I also believe that a lot of conservatives and liberals who believe in minimal government can find ways to agree with each other on some things, despite having different non-authoritarian means of living. I also believe that the ends do not justify the means. I don't believe in consequentialism. And another line you may have heard in the past related to Marx is to each according to his abilities or needs. I look at that as an individualistic line, and I let people figure that out for themselves. But essentially you want to do what you want and try to convince others not by using government force. So if you force someone to do some form of work or live somewhere else or change their lives, that's an improper use of the government. You should be able to determine your own abilities and needs, wants and desires, and make those decisions accordingly. So I do not look at this through a collectivist lens like a lot of people on the left do. I believe there is a likewise responsibilities that comes with freedom. I believe the two best types of communes are the family and business. And I also believe that voluntarism trumps democracy. In other words, a bunch of people in a room, the majority force the minority to do something against their will. I think that's bad. As much as people like to advocate for democracy, that's an example where the tyranny of the majority can unduly hurt the minority. Governments, businesses, groups, and individuals can be bad. State power should only protect individual rights, if anything, or nothing at all. States are no more individuals than businesses are, and they should not take direct action to harm anyone without consent or due process. I don't believe the Constitution is a holy document, but I do believe it's the best document of its kind, as long as it's adhered to, and I can only hope other nations institute their own constitutions as close to that one as possible. I don't care if my rights come from God, nature, or anything else. Regardless, the government didn't create my rights, and they are not to be infringed on by them without due process. I aim for a level of government that's properly sized by the constraints of the U.S. Constitution, but I don't stop there. I think we should try to do better than that over time, and I prefer to make government as small as possible and keep working towards eliminating it. I do believe that liberals are the good guys on the left and that conservatives are the good guys on the right. I believe a brand of left-winger called progressives are the bad guys on the left, and a brand of right-winger called the neoconservatives are the bad guys on the right. I believe libertarians and liberty-styled left and right-wingers are the future of freedom, so long as they reduce the power and scope of government and in the process allow individuals to remain free and choose whether or not they work together or work apart, so long as they don't harm each other. I aim for pushing for more individual liberty and against the tide of regression that is socialism. Personally, I consider myself a social moderate and fiscal conservative, with government as small as we can make it, with an eye on making it smaller. Because of that last part, I think that makes my social and fiscal positions less important, since the government can't force them on others. I do feel like neoconservatives are trying to co-opt the right by redefining conservatism by the standards, positions, priorities, and policies of the neocon right, aka Conservative Inc. Neoconservatism is definitely a consistent set of political positions on the right, but by no means the only policy prescriptions that we have. They won the Cold War, for example. So there are some strengths to this movement, but I think in some ways they've gone too far. I feel like the neocons today are basically trying to win the ideological battle on the right by excommunicating anyone else on the right who disagrees with them, no matter how principled or logically consistent those people might be, especially other right-wingers. And I'll just point out that Ronald Reagan used something known as fusionism, which is simply right-wing populism and appealing to all the other factions in the conservative movement. I don't believe mankind will ever get a government, but they can strive to make it more voluntary, less coercive, and more respectful of individual rights. And in the end, even the libertarian dream of Ancapistan will be governed in a way consistent with their principles. I'm for economic and social freedom. Politics is a relationship between economic and social issues, and it's arguable that political freedom is based on those two things and that they are interrelated. If you look at the three values of life, liberty, and property, they are all connected. You can't have liberty or property if you're not alive, and once you're alive, you can't really have liberty without property. The ability to own something, to possess it, as well as to do with it as you please, so long as you don't hurt others, is important. The role of government should be as limited as possible in a free society. Should it control people or protect people? I argue the latter. Our freedom comes with responsibilities to use that freedom well and not harm others with it, but that doesn't mean we need to be controlled by anyone. So any government, in my book, needs to protect life, liberty, and property. The property axis is left and right, and the liberty axis is up and down. And now I'm down to the odds and ends here. I could have made a much longer video, but this is what we're going to go with. People complain about government waste. I argue that government is inherently wasteful, so it's best to complain about government. I believe we aren't just a great company, we are an exceptional one because of our strong belief in individualism and free markets. So in the end, I consider myself a constitutional conservative, but I believe that label fits within the realm of libertarianism, though I don't consider myself an anarcho-capitalist because I believe there will always be some form of government for mankind because vacuums always end up getting filled, but it's my hope to see a more voluntary form in the future. I could literally go on for a lot longer, but I hope this puts into context who I am and what I believe politically, and that you can see where I'm coming from. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.